Hey, welcome to Heard of JCasC. Not sure where to start. Let me help you presentation. My name is Ewelina Wilkosz and I work as an IT consultant at Eficode. In the right bottom corner of that slide, you can see my GitHub and Twitter handle if you ever want to reach out. I specialize in continuous integration, continuous delivery, or whatever we're calling it these days. And the tools I work mostly with are Jenkins, Git, and Docker. And that's why I believe I actually have something interesting to show you today. So let's start. A bit more details about my experience, my journey with Jenkins is what we're gonna start with. So the first customer I have ever worked with as a consultant had a pretty old Jenkins installation. Things were starting to fail and they were not able to proceed with their release process. So my first task was to fix it for them, to update what we could update and to make it work all together. And that was very challenging. It was fun at times because obviously if you have a complicated task and you fix it after I don't know hours of detective work, it's rewarding. But it was scary at the same time because, well, I was pretty new when it comes to Jenkins, and I didn't want to break anything because I was also new at the company. So I was producing an insane amount of screenshots. Every change I was making, and it doesn't matter if it was job configuration or if it was Jenkins or plugins configuration. I was creating screenshots because there is no undo button in Jenkins. If you make a change, you have to remember what was before if you ever want to go back or just, hope for the best. So it worked, the screenshot solution, but as you may imagine, it's not the most effective one. So when the phase one was done, the Jenkins was stable and doing what was expected. We moved to the next phase, which was my first Eficode solution I have ever heard about, and that was post-initialization scripts. It's Groovy scripts that you put in a init.d folder under Jenkins Home. I don't really remember the full name of the folder, so it might be a bit different, but it's something about that. And every time you restart your Jenkins, those scripts are rerun, and you can use those scripts to configure Jenkins, whatever you have under Manage Jenkins page. Including configuration of the plugins that you install and have to configure there. So it worked. I could make change, and if I broke something, I could just restart Jenkins with the previous version of configuration. But the fact that I did have to restart Jenkins was bothering me a bit because it was always taking some time. And the other issue I had with this solution, no matter how much I love the outcome, was the fact that you do have to write this piece of Groovy code to actually configure anything. And for each new thing you want to configure, you have to write a new piece of Groovy code. And some may say that, it's not a rocket science, it's a simple Groovy and you can learn how to do it. And yes, probably you do. But we have to remember that not every Jenkins maintainer, administrator is a software developer, and no matter how easy some of us consider writing a script like that, it's not the case for everyone. So it wasn't a solution that anyone could apply just like that. So I started thinking about how to improve it, and obviously I wasn't the only person that was dreaming about being able to configure Jenkins as code. There were other people, my colleagues in my company, and people I have never heard about, members of Jenkins community, for example. And somehow I actually don't remember how it was initiated, but me and my colleagues from Pragma, which was the name of the company at that time, ended up having a meeting with people from CloudBees and JCasC, maybe Oleg Nienashev and Nicola Delouf. I'm not sure at which point they have joined, but some subset of those people were present at this first meeting, and it was really fun for me because JCasC started talking about his vision for Eficode solution and motivation behind it, and I had a piece of paper in front of me, prepared with some points about the configuration as code approach that I wanted to talk about, and whatever he was saying, I was like check. He was actually having his vision was pretty much in line with our vision, and it was nice to see that we seem to be going in the right direction. So we've decided to join the forces, people from Pragma, people from CloudBees, and of course amazing Jenkins community. And that's how Jenkins Configuration as Code plugin came to life. So let me very briefly tell you how it actually works. First of all, you have to install Configuration as Code plugin on your Jenkins instance in order to use the solution. And it really doesn't matter how you start up your Jenkins. I will use Docker, but you can have you can have Jenkins that you installed by clicking on your Windows, for example, and it can also handle Jenkins Configuration as Code plugin. You need to prepare your configuration file. And I'll show you examples and information how to actually find some help with producing the file. And the file has to be in a YAML format. You need an environment variable called casc Jenkins config that stores the information about the location of the file, and Configuration as Code plugin has to be able to access that environment variable. And yes, I use Docker Compose to do that. There are other ways, but the solution I'll be showing you will be using that, and we'll get to details later. So yeah, now it's time for later, where I'll show you how I do it. Jenkins, of course, will be used, but also GitHub and Docker, as I mentioned before. And you don't have to use GitHub and you don't have to use Docker, but those are the tools that I'm comfortable with and worked basically out of the box for me. But any other Git repository, any other Docker registry will do. You'll just have to, do a bit of work on your own. Yeah, so here we have it. Let's start with the Configuration as Code plugin, the official GitHub repository for that under Jenkins CA organization. Plenty of information here that I find very helpful and come back to quite often. Information for people who want to configure Jenkins with Configuration as Code plugin, and information for people who'd like to contribute. And the folder that I recommend you to look into, demos, contains examples of configuration of a subset of popular plugins. So you get a piece of YAML code that you can basically reuse in your configuration file. And yeah, there is plenty. Still, not all the plugins, since we have 1,700 of hundreds of them or more. Now I can't really keep up. But plenty of those I use at work are here. So very good place to look for some inspiration. And all the links, all the pages I'm showing you now, you'll have the links in the presentation that I'm pretty sure will find a way to share with you, or a conference will find a way to share with you, so you don't have to write down the links. First repository, JCasC core, contains Docker files and helper files for images I want to build. And the solution I have in mind that I'm going to talk about is dividing handling Docker images into one repository and Jenkins configuration in another repository. And the reason for that is that well, those things don't exactly have to happen together. In order to make it more reliable and faster for you to switch, for example, to a new version of Jenkins, we want to make sure that, like in our setups, that it's all going fast. So we want to have images pre-built, published somewhere, and stored somewhere for a long time, so it's always possible to go to the previous version. And a real life example, I have decided to upgrade Jenkins, switch to a newer version of Jenkins at one of my customers, and they use this solution. So what I need to do is to go to their Jenkins and check which version of the image they are using right now, and well, just write it down somewhere. Then I go to the JCasC core repository in their setup, and I change the version of Jenkins in the Docker file. That would be somewhere here. I change the version, I wait for the image to build and be published in Docker registry they are using. And then on the machine where I actually have this Jenkins up and running, I pre-pull the image using Docker pull command, and then I just restart the setup using the script that I'll show you in a second repository in a moment. And I can check if everything is okay. The image is built and pre-pulled, so the whole action takes seconds. And if I notice a weird behavior, I can very, very quickly go back, restart the Jenkins with coming back to the previous version they used, because I wrote down this version number or remembered it in some way. So that's the motivation between decoupling it into two repositories, handling images and handling configuration. The images are simple. I rely on install plugins sh script, which is a part of official Jenkins image, to install plugins that I define in a text file that has a format like that. ID of the plugin and the version. I don't think it's very wise to just put latest there. So in the real life setup, I would actually have version numbers here, but in order to just download the latest versions of the plugins for the purpose of a demo, I just put latest. And another important thing in the Docker file, let's go back to plugins for a second. We have to copy the plugins somewhere to the container in order to be able to use it as an input for the plugin. A subset of environment variables being configured, among others Jenkins home. So I actually know where the Jenkins home will be stored in the container, and disabling the setup wizard using Java opts. So when you start up your Jenkins for the first time, it's up and running, and it can even have your jobs pre-configured if you put some effort into that. There won't be any clicking required. And the other image I built here is agent. That's just an example. It's absolutely not needed for this setup to work, but it's just an example how to use Docker to start up a container and with the help of Swarm plugin actually automatically connect this container to Jenkins as a build agent, or a number of them. And then I've decided to use GitHub to build my Jenkins. So I rely on GitHub Actions, and my experience with GitHub Actions is basically non-existing, and it's still, with a bit of Googling, took me a few minutes to have it up and running. So whenever I make change in JCasC core repository, the JCasC image, which is Jenkins instance, the Jenkins master, and I think we're changing master to the controllers. I'm not sure at which stage of this process we are, but I'm pretty sure the change is coming. So sorry if I stick to the old version, old name. I'm getting used to the new one. And the JCasC agent are published and they are versioned with the short SHA. So this is the version number we'll use to start it up. And the second repository, the one where the actual configuration is being stored, is JCasC conf. We have a configs folder where a very simple configuration file is kept, and we have Docker Compose. And yeah, I told you we need to know where the location of the Jenkins home on the container is. That's why we set it up during the build in the Docker file. And in my Docker Compose file, I map the location of this location from the container to something that is the environment variable that is pointing to a folder on my host machine, and we'll get back to JCasC home in a second. The location of the folder with the configuration files is also mapped to a location in a container, and that location on a container is then being set as a content of the environment variable. Some settings related to the agent container too, but since this is not the main focus of this presentation, I'm not gonna talk much more about this. So we have our Docker Compose, and here we also use environment variable to define which version are we gonna use, which version of the image for JCasC and JCasC agent we want to use. And that's made that way so we can actually have a script, and that's the JCasC script where we set the version. And the JCasC home, in my case, it's actually going to be that folder. You just have to make sure that this folder exists before starting up the container, because if you set up mapping of the location on the container to location on your disk, on your machine, and the folder on your machine doesn't actually exist, it will be created as belonging to a root user, and then there will be a problem with actually accessing it. So you can set JCasC home to point to another folder, or you can just create that folder, but whatever folder it's pointing to, it has to exist. And then we just set the version of JCasC as the version you give to the script as a parameter when you run it. So let's actually try to run it. Let's clear. I don't have any container running, and in order to start it up, I just go. This is the command I'm going to use. Is it actually visible? It's not that great with the transparent terminal, I know, but let's move it a bit down. So I call the JCasC script with the argument app and the version number I want to use, and that comes from the Docker Hub. And the scale argument is about the number of agent containers I want to have. So maybe let's change it to 2. And I did run it a second ago before I started preparing this presentation. So I don't need to, the pool of the image is not required, but usually it could happen that it will take, I don't know, 30 seconds or something to pull the container. You can actually pre-pull the container on your own before. But now I have it, and I just need to wait a few seconds to have my Jenkins up and running. It usually takes seconds, I don't know, 20-30 seconds to have your Jenkins up and running. It's super slow on my computer when I do this recording, but it's up and running, I think. I mean, I know because I can see the tab here that says Dashboard Jenkins. If you're not sure what's happening, you can always just check the ID of your Jenkins container. and use docker logs command to print the logs. And somewhere here I have Jenkins is fully up and running. So my Jenkins is up, and I can click around. I don't have any job pre-configured, so, and the version has some dependency error issues, but that's just a matter of me not maintaining it on a regular basis, since this is just a demo setup. So it's here, and here are the links that I have used during that demos, the pages I was showing you. And it's time for a few tips and tricks. So the first important one is about the configuration file. Unless you're like 100% sure it's going to work, start simple, because until your configuration file is correct and suitable for configuration as code plugin with a subset of plugins you have installed to be used, your Jenkins will not start. So you have to start simple. And when I'm in trouble, I just remove everything from the configuration file, put it in another file, and just leave system message. Once your Jenkins is up and running, you can actually try change things in the configuration file, and even if you break the configuration file, it's not going to break your Jenkins. So let's see actually how to use it. Let's make a change in the configuration file, and like the simplest error to make is to put some well, that's not crazy, a typo in the name of the field. We'll save, and let's try to reload the configuration. And I'm in trouble. It tells me that something went wrong, and I'm not actually sure what's the problem. So I can always do the same thing I did before. I just print the logs, and I have a stack trace that is complaining that it's a valid configuration element for Jenkins system message. So that's a typo I made. And the most important thing is that nothing has changed. The system message is as it was before. It, if you use my example, it's gonna display the version of the image you had built to start it up, and you can just go back to the configuration file and well, fix the change. And that's a very simple example. It would be exactly the same if you actually made a bigger change. So let's look here. And I will not follow those in an exact order. How to avoid using documentation is another nice tip. So if you go under Manage Jenkins Configuration as Code, you have a number of things you can see here. I was using reload existing configuration. If I hit it now, again, after I fixed the configuration, it's not going to throw an error. But you can also view the configuration. So you can have your Jenkins configured manually and just print the YAML configuration that you can use. You shouldn't just copy it in full and paste it into your configuration file and hope it's going to work, because there might be still some minor issues. There might be some stack traces here if the plugin is not compatible with configuration as code yet, and there's plenty of things that are like related to agents that, in case of a swarm agent, doesn't have to be kept in the configuration file, and plenty of default settings that are printed here that you also don't need to keep in the configuration file. But you can just go one by one and put in your configuration file, and that's helpful also when you try to have old instance working somewhere and you're creating a new one in a different place and maybe want to reuse some pieces of the configuration. You can always use this as an inspiration. And two other things, the documentation is also available on that page, so you can whenever I need I don't know how to configure something, I never configured it before, or maybe the new version of plugins moved or renamed some fields. This is what I look for. So, for example, we have credentials, and since this is automatically generated, some parts are described in a really nice way, and some parts are not that great. Credentials are a bit tricky, but well, if you know how to navigate around it, it's becoming clearer. So we know that credentials is a root element, so it doesn't have any indentation in the YAML file, and then when you wanna change something, you just try to figure out which name which field from the UI would fit the name here, and well, usually they are very similar. So I want to create system credentials, so I search for system credentials provider, and then I see it has domain credentials, and domain credentials has two attributes, etc., etc. So you can kind of follow that using. Sometimes there is a link. And if there is no link, you have to use the search. And the last thing I have on my list of how to make it easier is keep your Jenkins home safe. So I told you I have Jenkins home folder created. I called it JCasC home on my machine. And here all the things, including jobs, configuration and history, is being stored. And if I want to make, for example, a significant upgrade, switch to a new version that seems to introduce a lot of changes, what I would do is I would copy this folder somewhere safe to have it on the side untouched, and then I would try to run Jenkins with that home folder and the new version of Jenkins. And if that doesn't work, and somehow the new version of Jenkins corrupted some of the files, I can always put it down, move back the content of the original JCasC home, and start it up again with the old version. So I can have my Jenkins up and running, and then maybe use some staging environment to experiment a bit with the newer version, a combination on the newer version and for example, the content of this folder. So my time is running up, or it maybe had run up already. Sorry about that, but I really wanted to make sure that you get all the information that I wanted to share with you. If there is still some time for answering questions, I'm gonna stay and answer them for you. Thank you for joining.